Chapter 1. The Bell That Called from Elsewhere from the New Ark. The garden beyond the mist, a new beginning. In the fog many years had passed since the bells last rang in the village by the old forest. The bell-tree still stood, tall, now wrapped in soft vines and surrounded by quiet stones, where names were etched by gentle hands. Most villagers had grown old. Many had moved away. But the memory of the fog, the bells, and the girl who walked between them, Melon remained like a melody. People hummed without knowing why, and then the fog came again. But this time it didn't rise from the hills. It fell from the sky, soft and shimmering, like moonlight turned to mist, and with it came a sound, a bell not distant, not metallic, but hollow and new. The stranger who knew the path in a town far from the forest. A girl named Ira awoke from a dream. She had never heard of Ellen. She had never seen a bell tree, but in her sleep she had walked through fog and light, and someone had whispered, "You carry a bell that hasn't been born yet." When she woke, her pillow was damp with dew, and in her hand was a string, tied in a perfect loop, woven with threads that shimmered softly. Though no sunlight touched them, she heard the bell again, not in her ears, but in her chest. It pulsed with a rhythm older than fear. The map that isn't drawn Naira didn't pack much. Only what she felt was needed. A small notebook with no writing, a pencil, a jar with no lid, a dried petal from a flower she had never seen bloom, and the string. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, because even she didn't know. But each morning, as she walked, the fog appeared on the horizon guiding her forward, and every night she dreamed of a tree. Not the bell tree, another one, younger, not yet awake, a bell with no sound. After 7 nights of walking, Ira arrived at a clearing. It did not look magical, just grass, stone, and a single stump cracked and covered in moss. But when she stepped forward, the fog pulled away gently, and there, on the stump, lay a bell, small, wooden, wrapped in a ribbon of blue and gold. She picked it up. It didn't ring, but she felt it, a vibration, like a voice waiting to speak. And then the wind whispered through the grass, carrying one word: plant it. The first bell garden Ira dug into the soil with her hands. The earth was soft like memory. She placed the bell gently into the hollow and tied the string around a nearby stone. Then she sat and waited. The fog curled close, not hiding, but watching, and slowly something impossible began to rise. Not a tree, not a flower, a bell growing upward like a vine, opening like a bloom, humming like a held breath. When it opened fully, it shimmered with light, not to be heard, but to be remembered. The journey begins again that night. Ira slept under the stars. She dreamed not of trees, but of gardens vast, gentle, filled with bells of every shape. And at the center, a girl with a coat made of thread and a smile like water. Elen. But she did not speak. She only nodded and pointed to the horizon, where the mist was calling again. Part 2. The boy who drew bells in the air. The arrival of Lightara awoke to a sky brushed in shades of lavender and pale gold. The fog had lifted for the first time in days, revealing a world crisp with the promise of change. She stood before the tree, the one that had grown the bell, a gift from the land itself. The earth beneath her feet seemed to hum with a soft energy, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. In the distance, a low sound echoed, a rhythmic tapping that belonged to no bird nor wind. It was a voice, but one that could not be heard, only felt. It seemed to call from the trees, urging Ira onward, towards something she couldn't name. She took a step forward, and in the same moment, she felt the ground shift beneath her. More present, the air thickened around her, filled with the scent of earth and pine. And then she saw him, the boy who spoke in Belzat, the edge of the clearing. Near the stump where Ira had first planted the bell, stood a boy. He couldn't have been older than 10, his face light with a glow of curiosity and wonder. His hair was messy, tousled by the wind that swirled softly through the trees. He wore a simple tunic of muted colors, earth tones, green and brown, woven with the same threads Ira had felt earlier. But it was the bell around his neck that drew her attention. It wasn't made of wood, stone, or glass. It was woven from light. It pulsed faintly, like the rhythm of a heart. A bell that had no sound, but a presence. The boy stood still, his gaze fixed on her, his hands outstretched in front of him. Ira was about to ask him who he was, but before she could speak, he spoke first. "I have been waiting for you." His voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it was clear as a mountain stream. "I am here," he said, "to show you the way." The boy's gift. The boy stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and when he reached Ira, he reached out his hand. She took it, uncertain but trusting. His skin was warm, most like the sun, but beneath the warmth, she could feel something ancient, like the pulse of the forest itself. He gestured toward the tree, his other hand still glowing faintly with the energy of the bell. "Do you see the bell?" he asked. Ira nodded, looking at the bell woven into the branches. But now, for the first time, she could see it clearly, not just as an object, but as a living thing. It was not just a bell. It was a key. It pulsed with purpose, as if it had a story to tell. But not yet. The boy smiled gently, then closed his eyes. A soft hum began to vibrate in the air, filling the space between them. The bell began to ring, not loudly, but with a subtle, harmonic resonance that resonated deep inside Ira's chest. She closed her eyes and listened, and then she heard Ita whisper, soft and far away, like wind passing through the trees. "The bell has come to guide. It will lead you back home." The path between the trees. When Ira opened her eyes again, the boy had stepped back, allowing the path to clear before them. The air had shifted. The fog had returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't thick or suffocating. It wasn't heavy. It was like a curtain being drawn aside, revealing a hidden path among the trees, the mist swirling around the trunks like dancers. The boy turned to Ira, his eyes still glowing faintly in the twilight. "Follow," he said simply, "and you will find what you are searching for." Ira nodded, her heart steady now. The bell at her side began to hum again, almost like a heartbeat in time with her own. As she stepped forward, she felt the forest shift around her, not in a way that scared her, but in a way that felt like she was returning home. The path wound through the trees, quiet and soft. The fog parted as she moved, clearing the way, but always just a step ahead of her, never too far. And with each step, the boy's presence stayed with her, guiding, but never speaking. They walked in silence, only the soft hum of the bell accompanying them. The door between worlds. The path eventually led them to a clearing, where the trees parted to reveal a large stone structure, half hidden by moss and time. It was ancient, older than anything Ira had seen in the village or the surrounding woods. In the center of the structure, there was a door not made of wood, but of light, glowing faintly like the bell around the boy's neck. The boy stopped, and turned to Ira, his eyes deep with understanding. "The door is not a place," he said. "It is a moment. You must decide." Ira's choice. The door shimmered in front of them, waiting. Like an invitation, Ira felt the weight of the knowledge that beyond the door was something new, something important. The boy stood beside her, his presence steady, yet not forcing her forward. She stepped forward, her hand resting against the cool light of the door. It felt like the pulse of the bell. It felt like the pulse of her own heart. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped through. Part 3. Beyond the light. The moment between the doors, when Ira stepped through the glowing doorway. The world around her seemed to dissolve into a haze of soft, iridescent light. For a moment, there was no ground beneath her feet, no trees, no sky, only the quiet hum of the bell at her side and the pulsing rhythm of her heart. The air was warm. The light was gentle, and the silence was not empty. It was full of something she couldn't name. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. Ira found herself standing in a place unlike any she had ever seen. The garden beyond the mist. Before her lay a vast garden, stretching endlessly in every direction. The air smelled of wildflowers and earth, fresh rain and ancient stone. The ground beneath her feet was soft and covered with patches of grass. Yet she knew this place was not like the village or the forest. The trees here were different, tall, slender, and covered with thick vines that shimmered with droplets of dew. Flowers bloomed in hues of silver, gold, and pale blue, their petals delicate like the finest silk. But what struck Ira the most was the stillness. No birds chirped, no wind rustled the leaves. It was as if time itself had paused here, and standing in the center of the garden was a figure, a woman, tall and radiant, dressed in robes woven from the same shimmering threads Ira had seen in her dreams. The keeper of the garden. The woman smiled softly as Ira approached, her eyes glowing with a light that mirrored the very garden she stood in. "I've been waiting for you," she said, her voice gentle, as if it carried the weight of ages. Ira stopped a few steps away, still unsure of what to say or do. She felt drawn to the woman, to this garden, but a quiet sense of fear held her back. The woman seemed to read her thoughts. "This place," she continued, "is not a place at all. It is a memory, one that has been waiting for someone who remembers how to listen." Ira's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the weight of the woman's words settle deep in her chest. "I was once like you," the woman said, walking closer. "A wanderer, searching for something I could not name. But I found it here, in this garden, in the memories of those who came before me. And now, it's your turn to listen." The memory tree. The woman motioned toward the center of the garden, where a tree stood taller than any Ira had seen before. Its trunk was silver, and its branches spread wide, covered in leaves that glowed softly in the dim light. "This is the memory tree," the woman explained. "It holds the stories of those who have walked through this garden. Each leaf, each branch, is a tale waiting to be told." Ira felt drawn to the tree, her feet moving of their own accord. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the smooth surface of the trunk. As she did, a soft warmth spread through her hand, and she heard a faint whisper, a voice that felt both familiar and distant. "The tree speaks," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It speaks to those who are ready to listen, to those who have a story to find." The first memory. As Ira placed her hand more firmly on the tree, the whispers grew louder. They filled her mind, not with words, but with images, fragments of memories that she knew were not her own. She saw a woman standing in a field of golden flowers, her face glowing with light. She saw a child laughing in the rain, dancing between droplets as if they were part of the storm itself. She saw a man alone in a darkened room, holding a faded photograph of someone he had lost. The images shifted and changed, faster now, like a dream that couldn't be caught. But through it all, there was one constanta feeling, a pull, drawing her deeper into the memories of the past. "Ira," the woman said softly, "the tree is showing you the way. You are part of this garden, part of this story. A choice to make as the images faded and the whispers quieted." Ira found herself standing in front of the tree, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had seen. The woman was no longer beside her, but Ira knew she was still there, watching. "You must decide now," the woman's voice echoed from the shadows. "Will you continue your journey through the garden, uncovering the stories that lie within? Or will you turn back, returning to the world you once knew?" Ira closed her eyes, the weight of the decision pressing against her chest. She didn't know what lay ahead, but something within her told her that this garden, this place of memories, was where she was meant to be. The bell at her side began to hum again, faintly, like a heartbeat that matched her own. She looked up at the memory tree, its branches reaching toward the sky, as if inviting her to take the next step. "I'm ready," Ira whispered. The path ahead with those words, the garden shifted. The ground beneath her feet trembled slightly, and the air around her grew warmer. The woman's figure appeared once more, her eyes glowing brighter now. "Then go," she said, smiling. "The story is yours to tell." Ira stepped forward, her feet light, as if the garden itself was guiding her. With each step, the world around her began to change, the colors of the flowers and trees shifting as though the very landscape was alive with stories waiting to be uncovered. And as she walked, Ira knew that she was no longer a stranger to this place. She had become part of it. Part 4. The roots beneath the garden, the path grows clearer. R.A. moved deeper into the garden, her feet light as though the earth beneath her had become part of her journey. The air was different here still, but alive with a quiet hum that seemed to come from the very ground. The trees, with their silver trunks and glowing leaves, whispered in soft tones, like secrets passed from one generation to the next. As she walked, the sound of the wind through the branches became softer, almost like a lullaby. But Ira didn't feel tired. She felt connected to the garden, to the earth, to something older and more ancient than anything she had ever known. She paused as she approached a small stone circle at the heart of the garden. The stones were covered in moss, but they weren't just ordinary stones. They had markings on them, symbols etched deep into their surfaces, worn by time but still visible, still vibrant. Ira knelt down, her fingers tracing the patterns. As she touched the last symbol, a soft vibration ran through her fingertips. The ground beneath her trembled slightly, and for a moment the air seemed to shimmer. The bell at her side rang softly, like an echo from far away. The roots that hold time. The stones were not just a part of the garden. They were a gate, a threshold to something hidden beneath. Ira stood, and as she did, the earth shifted, parting like the gentle opening of a door. The ground beneath her feet seemed to breathe, the roots of the trees pulling back, revealing an underground passage that stretched forward into the depths of the garden. Ira's heart quickened, but she wasn't afraid. She felt a pull toward the unknown, toward the answers she had come seeking. And so, without hesitation, she stepped into the passage. The air grew cooler as she descended into the earth. The light from above faded, but the glow of the bell around her neck brightened, lighting her way. The passage was narrow, but it stretched long, winding deeper and deeper into the heart of the garden. The deeper she went, the more she felt the roots of the garden. The walls were lined with them, thick and twisted, like veins beneath the surface of the earth. But they weren't just roots, they were memories, woven together, pulsing with life. Each step she took felt like she was walking through a living story, the past and present intertwined, the voice of the earth at the end of the passage. Ira arrived at a small chamber. The air was thick with the scent of earth and ancient stone. In the center of the chamber was a large rooter, single tree root that stretched from the floor to the ceiling, glowing softly with an inner light, and from it a voice spoke not aloud, but inside her mind. You've come, you've found the roots of the garden, but do you understand why you are here? Ira didn't know what to say. She had never asked for answers. She had only come to understand. But something about the voice, gentle, soothing, and wise, made her feel that she was meant to be here. I don't know why, Ira whispered, but I feel like I have always been meant to be here. The root pulsed gently, as if the earth itself was listening, understanding. You are more than you know. The garden is a place of memory, but it is also a place of becoming. You are walking the path between what was and what will be, and now you must choose. The choice beneath the root. Ra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision before her. She had always believed in the journey, in the act of walking forward, never looking back. But this was different. This was not just a path, it was the beginning of something greater. She reached out and placed her hand on the glowing root. It felt warm, alive, like it was breathing beneath her palm. And then, as her fingers touched the surface, the root shifted. A crack appeared, and within it, Ira saw a glimmering lighter vision. It was the village, but not as it was. The houses were gone, replaced by tall trees and flowing rivers. The ground was covered in wildflowers, and the bell tree stood at the center. No longer a singular tree, but a grove, its roots stretching deep into the earth. She saw faces, people she had never met, but knew. The child who had once played near the well, the elder who told stories by the fire, and Ellen, standing at the center of the grove, holding the bell high. The vision faded as quickly as it had come. But Ira understood. This garden, this path, was not just for her. It was for the village, for the land. It was part of something larger, something that could not be fully understood until it was lived. The roots beneath her feet pulsed again, and the voice spoke once more. You are ready. The path will not be easy, but you are not alone. The garden has chosen you. The path forward. Ra stepped back from the glowing root and turned toward the passage. The walls closed behind her, the roots returning to their natural place, as if the garden had accepted her decision. She walked up the passage, her heart light, the bell around her neck vibrating softly, like a heartbeat in time with her own. As she emerged from the earth, she looked up at the sky. The fog was gone, and the sun shone brightly on the garden, casting long shadows across the glowing trees. It was time to return, but not to the village as it had been. It was time to begin. A new story, a story that would grow from the roots of the garden and stretch into the world beyond. Part 5. The Heart of the Grove. The return to the grove. Ray stood at the edge of the garden, the mist swirling around her like an old friend, guiding her path. The bell at her side pulsed gently, and the soft hum filled the air. There was a feeling of knowing now, a quiet certainty that Ira had never known before. She had walked this path, touched the roots, and stood before the tree. But there was more to see, more to understand. As she moved forward, the trees parted, allowing her through. The grove was still. The air was thick with silence, but the silence was not empty. It was full of life, full of stories waiting to be told. The grove felt alive, its pulse matching her own. The memory tree stood at the center of the grove, its trunk wide and strong, its branches stretching toward the sky. But now, as Ira approached, she noticed something new. At the base of the tree, there was a root larger and more powerful than any she had seen before. It glowed faintly, pulsing with an energy that felt familiar. The root of Truthiere knelt beside the root, her fingers brushing the surface. The moment she touched it, a surge of energy coursed through her, and she felt herself being pulled down into the earth. She gasped, but the pull was gentle, not forceful, as if the earth itself was inviting her to listen. She closed her eyes, and the world around her shifted. The vision of the past Tyre found herself standing in a different time. The trees around her were younger, their trunks thinner, their branches reaching high into the sky. She saw people villagers, just like the ones she had met in the past. They walked through the garden, planting seeds, tending to the trees, and nurturing the land. At the center of the village stood a large bell, much like the ones Ira had seen before, but larger, stronger, with a deep resonance that vibrated in the air. The villagers gathered around it, offering their gratitude for the land, for the gifts it had given them. The bell rang once, deep and clear, its sound filling the air. But it wasn't just a sound. It was a message, carried on the wind, traveling. Beyond the village, Ira could hear the whisper of the bell, not with her ears, but with her heart. When the bell rings, the land remembers. She understood. The bell was a symbol, a reminder that the land was alive, that it remembered those who had walked before. It had listened, and it had kept their stories. The choice of the Grove division shifted, and Ira found herself standing beside the memory tree again. The root she had touched was now alive, pulsing with energy, like the heartbeat of the grove itself. The woman who had guided her appeared, standing beside the tree. Her face was serene, but there was a glint of sadness in her eyes. "You have seen the past," she said softly, "but the future lies ahead. The path you choose now will shape the land, the village, and the garden. Will you return and bring the memory of the bell to your people? Or will you stay here, listening to the stories that have yet to be told?" Ira felt the weight of the decision. The path ahead was unclear, but she knew one thing. The garden had already chosen her. The woman smiled, as if she knew the choice Ira would make. "Remember," she said, "it is not the bell that calls the story, it is the listener." The path forward, Ira stood in the silence of the grove, her heart beating with the rhythm of the land. She looked around at the trees, the flowers, the roots, all part of a story that was still unfolding. She knew what she had to do. She turned, her feet light on the soft earth, and began walking toward the village, the bell at her side vibrating gently in the quiet air. The fog had lifted, and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ground as she walked. She could feel the presence of the garden with her, its memories flowing through her veins. She had found her place in the story, and now it was time to share it. The return to the village When Ira returned to the village, the people gathered to greet her. They had been waiting for her, as if they had known she would come back, but they didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. Ira smiled, holding the bell in her hands. She didn't need to speak. The bell rang once, softly, its sound filling the air with a gentle resonance, and with that, the village remembered. Part 6. The sound of the village remembering the return to silence. The village had always been quiet. But when Ira returned with the bell, the silence took on a new quality, an inviting silence, a silence full of expectation. It wasn't empty. It was full of stories, full of memories waiting to be remembered. The villagers gathered around her, not with questions, but with curiosity in their eyes. They didn't ask her where she had been or what she had seen. They had all felt the shift in the air, the quiet humming that had filled the village the moment she returned. Ira stood in the center of them, the bell gently ringing with a soft, almost imperceptible chime. The sound wasn't loud, but it filled the space like an invisible thread that wove them all together. She didn't need to speak. The bell spoke for her. The bell rings again for the first time in many years. The villagers heard the bell clearly. It wasn't a distant chime, echoing from the trees, but a real sound, close and direct, vibrating in the very air around them. One by one, the villagers closed their eyes, listening. Each of them heard something different, but the sound of the bell united them all. The bell carried memories, memories of lost seasons, of long-forgotten faces, of love and loss and joy. Some saw fields of wildflowers in the spring. Some saw children playing by the river. Some felt the warmth of the sun on their skin, the taste of bread freshly baked. For each villager, the bell reminded them of something they had forgotten, something they had lost, and in that moment, they remembered together. The song of the land. As the bell rang once more, something changed. The ground beneath Ira's feet seemed to hum with energy, and the trees around the village began to stir. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of fresh earth and leaves. The fog that had once hovered over the village began to shift, not receding, but moving live and breathing, like it was following the rhythm of the bell. Ira stepped forward, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her. The village had awakened, just as the land had. It wasn't just the bell that had changed the village. It was the remembering. The act of remembering was powerful, a magic that spread through the village like wildfire, stirring something deep within the earth itself. The village had been waiting for this moment, not for Ira, but for the return of the song of the land, and now it was singing again. The gathering that night. The village held a gathering like none before. Not a celebration, but a coming together, quiet acknowledgement of the land, the fog, the bell, and the village itself. Ira stood beside the bell tree. The villagers gathered around her, all of them in a loose circle. No one spoke at first. They didn't need to. The air was thick with the resonance of the bell, still vibrating in their hearts. One by one, the villagers closed their eyes and placed their hands on the bell tree. As they did, they heard the bell again, not just in the air, but inside them. Some saw visions, visions of the past, visions of the future, or perhaps just a quiet remembering of things long buried in the corners of their minds. And as they shared the experience, they knew that something had changed, not just in them, but in the very earth beneath their feet. The bell tree had awakened, but more importantly, the village had. The path forward the next morning, the village was still. But it was not the stillness of before. It was a stillness that felt alive, a stillness filled with the hum of new growth, new life. Ira walked through the village, the bell still ringing softly in her chest, a constant reminder of the connection between the land, the village, and herself. The villagers went about their work, but there was a new energy in the air. The fields seemed richer, the trees seemed taller, the rivers ran clearer, and as Ira walked, she saw the village in a new light. She had returned, but it wasn't just her that had changed. The entire village had transformed, and they all knew it. They were no longer just living in the village. They were part of it, part of the land, part of the story that stretched back through the trees and into the fog. And as the bell rang one last time, Ira knew that the garden was not just a place, but a memory that would never fade. Chapter 7. The Echoes of the Forgotten Bells. The quiet before the storm. The village had been peaceful for many months. After Ira's return, the fog no longer clung to the edges of the trees, nor did it linger in the corners of the village. The air was clean, the skies open and blue, and the people of the village worked in harmony with the land, as if the very earth itself had embraced them. The bell, still hanging from the bell tree, rang only when the wind was right, a soft and gentle hum that filled the village with quiet peace. But something was stirring. Not in the land, not in the trees. Something in Ira. It was subtle at first, a feeling she couldn't place, a stirring inside her, like a long-forgotten memory trying to surface. She had been walking by the river one evening, listening to the soft lapping of the water when the bell rang. But this time, it wasn't a soft hum, it was sharp. It rang twice, and then all was silent. The call from the hills that night. As Ira sat by the fire, she felt it pull a quiet tug in her chest, like a thread being tugged on by an unseen hand. She couldn't ignore it. It called her, drawing her toward the hills, toward the place where the fog had first come from so long ago, the very place where she had discovered the garden. Without a word, she stood, the bell still around her neck, and began her walk toward the hills. She didn't know why. She didn't know what was waiting for her, but the bell hummed softly as she walked, the sound guiding her steps. The forgotten path. As she walked, Ira noticed something strange. The familiar path was no longer as clear as it had been. The stones that once lined the way were overgrown with vines and moss. The trees, once tall and welcoming, now felt more imposing, as if they were watching her. And then she saw it, a path that had not been there before, path hidden beneath the overgrowth, leading deeper into the hills, into the heart of the forest. Ira felt the pull again. This was the way. She had to follow it. The air grew cooler as she walked deeper, the fog returning to the trees like an old friend. It felt familiar, but also different. The fog seemed to whisper, not with words, but with feelings. The further she walked, the more the fog seemed to close in around her, until the world beyond was blurred and indistinct, the bell that led her home finally. After what seemed like hours, Ira reached the end of the path. She stepped into a clearing, and in the center of it stood a stone structure, weathered by time, with vines creeping up its sides. At its base was another bell, this one different from the ones in the village. It was larger, made of stone, with intricate carvings that seemed to shimmer in the fog. Ira stepped forward, her heart beating faster now, and placed her hand on the bell. As soon as she touched it, the air shifted. The fog parted, revealing a scene that was at once familiar and strange. The vision of the forgotten ones. Zor saw the village, but not as it was now. She saw it as it had been in the past, long before the fog had come. long before the bell had begun to ring. The streets were bustling with people, and the houses were whole, standing proudly beneath the towering trees. And then she saw the bells, just the one at the bell tree, but many others scattered throughout the village. Each bell was different. Some were made of stone, others of wood, and some even of crystal. But all of them rang in harmony, creating a sound that resonated with the land itself. The people were not just living in the village, they were one with it. The bells connected them to the earth, to the trees, to the very air they breathed. The village was alive with sound, with memory, with life. And then, in the midst of the vision, a figure appeared. It was Ellen Young, vibrant, standing in the center of the village, holding a bell high above her head. Her eyes were bright, full of a light Ira had never seen before. The vision shifted, and Ira saw the fog creeping into the village, slowly, insidiously, erasing the bells one by one, muting their sound. And with the silence came the forgetting. The village no longer remembered its purpose, and the bells, once ringing in harmony, now sat silent and still. The vision faded, and Ira stood in the clearing, her heart heavy with understanding. The decision, Ira knew what she had to do. The village had forgotten its connection to the land. The bells had been silenced, and with them, the memory of the village itself. She walked back to the stone bell, her hand still resting on it, and closed her eyes. The fog surrounded her again, but this time it wasn't oppressive. It was welcoming. She raised her hand and placed it on the bell again. This time, she whispered, "It's time to remember." The bell rung, not with sound, but with light. A soft glow spread outward from it, casting light through the fog, illuminating the path. The fog began to lift, and the sound of bells, soft, clear, harmonious, rang through the air, filling the space around her. And for the first time in years, the village remembered. The return to the village RA stood for a moment in the clearing, listening to the bells ring out, filling the air with their resonant tone. She felt the pulse of the land beneath her feet, the connection between the trees, the village, and the bells. When she turned to leave, she knew that the village was no longer the same. It had awakened, just as she had. And now it was her task to help it remember again. Chapter 8. The Circle of Remembering. The return to the village RA stood at the edge of the village, watching the fog retreat, as if it, too, had realized it was no longer needed. The village was bathed in the soft, golden light of the morning, the sky clear and vast, stretching above her like an endless possibility. The bells, once silent, now rang faintly in the distance, their sounds carried on the breeze, echoing through the trees and across the fields. The air seemed alive, and the land beneath Iris's feet hummed with a quiet energy, as if it had been waiting for her return. She took a step forward, the ground beneath her feeling soft and firm at the same time. As she walked through the village, the villagers emerged from their homes, looking at her with eyes full of recognition and wonder. They didn't ask her questions. They didn't need to. They had remembered. The gathering of the village gathered in the center, around the bell tree as Ira approached. The tree stood tall, its branches reaching up toward the sky, its roots deep in the earth. The bell, once quiet, now rang clearly, its tone resonating with the heartbeat of the land. Ira placed her hand on the tree, and as she did, she felt a pulse, the pulse of the land, the pulse of the people, the pulse of memory, one by one. The villagers stepped forward, their hands resting on the bell tree, their eyes closed in silent communion. The sound of the bell filled the air, not with loudness, but with presence, a presence that could be felt in the chest, in the bones, in the heart. The memories of the village began to resurface, not just in Ira, but in everyone. They saw the land as it had once been, alive with sound, with movement, with growth. They remembered the days before the fog had settled in, when the village had been a thriving, connected community. They remembered the bells, small and large, wood and stone, glass and crystal each, one carrying a piece of the village's story. Each one a connection to the past, a reminder of what had been lost, and what could still be found. The memory circled as the villagers stood in a circle, the bell ringing softly above them. Ira felt the connection between them all. She had come to the village as a stranger, but now she was part of it. She was part of the memory, the living, breathing story that was carried by the earth, by the trees, by the people. The woman who had guided her through the garden appeared once more, standing beside the bell tree, her eyes soft with understanding. "You have done well, Ira," she said, her voice like the wind, carrying the weight of time. "You have brought the village back to life, and now the village will carry you." Ira looked at the woman, her heart swelling with gratitude and awe. She had never understood the power of memory until now, until she had felt it in her own bones, in her own soul. "It's not just the bell," Ira whispered. "It's the remembering." The woman smiled, her eyes glowing with a light that seemed to come from the very roots of the earth. "Yes, the bell is only a reminder," she said, "but it is the remembering that brings the land back to life. It is the remembering that connects us all." The circle expands. The villagers stood together, hands resting on the bell tree. Ira realized that they were not just a part of the village's past, they were part of its future. They had the power to shape the land, to nurture it, to listen to it, and to remember what it had once been. The bell rang again, its sound filling the air with warmth and clarity. It was no longer just a bell. It was a connection to the earth, to the sky, to the trees, to each other. The village had been lost, but now it had found its way home. The promise of the future. Ira stepped back from the bell tree, feeling the weight of the moment. The village was awake again, alive with the hum of the bell, the rustling of the trees, and the gentle murmur of the people. The air was rich with possibility. She turned to the villagers, who were now looking at her with eyes full of understanding. "I came here to find something," Ira said, her voice steady. "But I found more than I ever expected. I found you. I found the land. I found the stories that have been waiting to be told." The villagers smiled, their faces glowing with the light of the bell. "We will remember," one of them said, "and we will tell the stories together." Ira nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle deep within her. And as the bell rang once more, louder and clearer than before, she knew that this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Chapter 9. The Tapestry of Echoes. The stillness of new beginnings. The morning sun rose over the village, casting soft beams of light over the bell tree. The bell rang with a deep, resonating sound, not loud, but clear, filling the village with a sense of peace that had been absent for far too long. Iris stood at the edge of the village, looking toward the grove, her heart full of understanding. She had brought the village back to life, but it wasn't her doing alone. It was the land, the trees, the bell, and most importantly, the people. They had all been part of the remembering, and now they were all part of the becoming. The village felt different now. There was an energy in the air, a gentle hum, as if everything, the trees, the earth, the people, was in perfect harmony. The fog had dissipated, not because it had been chased away, but because it was no longer needed. It had given way to the sunlight, and with it, the memories of the village had returned. The people moved with purpose, but it was not a rushed purpose. It was the purpose of connection, of working together in harmony, of remembering who they were and what they had lost, and now what they could build. The tapestry of time that afternoon, Ira sat by the bell-tree, watching the villagers work together. To restore the village, the ground was rich with promise, the trees were tall and strong, and the air felt fresh with the fragrance of blooming flowers. It was then that she realized the true meaning of her journey. The bell had not just been a guide to the past, it had been a key to the future. The past and future were woven together like threads in a tapestry. Ira's journey had been part of that tapestry, but she was not the only thread. Every person in the village was a thread, and together they created the fabric of this place. The land was not just a place to live, it was a living, breathing entity that remembered everything. The trees, the soil, the air, they all held the stories of the village. And now the village had returned to those stories, the keeper of the stories that evening. As the sun began to set and the village gathered round the fire, Ira was approached by an elder woman. The woman's hair was white, but her eyes were sharp, full of wisdom and understanding. She had been silent during the day, working alongside the others, but now she stood before Ira, as if she had been waiting for her to arrive. "I've seen it," the woman said, her voice soft but steady. "The change, the shift, the land has awakened." Ira nodded, feeling the weight of the woman's words settle in her chest. "I know," she said quietly. "I can feel it too. The village has changed. The land has changed." The elder smiled. "It's not just the village, child. It's the world. The bell, the garden, the fog, they were all part of this. But it is not just the bell that makes the village what it is. It is the people, the stories they carry, the memories they share." Ira looked at her, puzzled. The stories are the threads," the woman explained. "They connect the people to the land, to each other. When the bell rang, it woke the stories. It brought them back to life. And now it is time for the stories to be shared, passed down, so that future generations will remember. They will know who they are and where they come from." The circle of remembering Ore spent the next few days with the villagers, helping them restore their homes, tend to the fields, and share the memories that had come flooding back. Every evening they gathered around the fire, telling stories of the past, stories of their ancestors, of the land, and of the village that had been lost and then found again. Each story was a thread woven into the tapestry of their lives. And as they shared these stories, they began to remember even more things they had forgotten, things they had lost, and things they had never known. The bell rang each evening, not to call them together, but to remind them that they were part of something larger than themselves. The bell was the anchor, the pulse that kept them grounded. The next chapter, as the days turned into weeks, Ira continued her work with the villagers, but now she understood her role. She was not the savior of the village. She was simply the one who had helped them remember, the one who had given them the key to unlocking the stories of the past. And now it was time for the villagers to continue the work, to tell their stories, to share their knowledge, to build a future rooted in the land and in the memories of those who had come before them. Ira stood at the edge of the village one morning, looking out over the fields. The fog had completely disappeared, replaced by a clear, crisp sky. The bell rang once more, not with urgency, but with a quiet invitation. The invitation to remember. The invitation to begin again. She smiled to herself, knowing that the journey was far from over. The bell would ring again, and the stories would continue. Chapter 1. Oh, the tapestry unfolds. The weight of the Belther village had changed since Ira's return, but not in the way she had expected. The bell, still hanging from the bell tree, rang every evening, but its sound was no longer just a reminder of the past. It had become a guiding light, a signal to the villagers that they were on the right path, no longer wandering in the fog, but walking toward something greater. Ira had thought that by helping the village remember, she had completed her journey, but she quickly realized that the act of remembering was just the beginning. The village had to rebuild, but this time it wasn't about the land or the village. It was about the people, their connection to each other, their connection to the land, their connection to the stories. As the bell rang each evening, Ira felt its call deep in her chest. The weight of it was both comforting and overwhelming. It wasn't just a sound, it was a tapestry of lives, of memories, of futures yet to be written. She could feel the pulse of the bell reverberating through her, like a thread weaving itself into her soul. The gathering of threads one evening. Ira sat by the fire with the villagers, the bell's resonance in the air as they shared their stories. The conversation was light at first, filled with laughter and recollections of days gone by. But slowly, the stories grew deeper. They began to remember the ancestors, the ones who had walked the land before them, the ones who had planted the first seeds in the soil. Ira listened, her heart swelling with understanding. She was not just part of the village's present. She was part of its history, its future. The threads of the past, woven into the fabric of the present, were now part of the tapestry that would shape the future. As the fire crackled, the villagers began to speak of the land in a new way, not just as a place to live, but as a living partner, one that had shared in their struggles, their victories, their losses. They had forgotten that for a long time, but now they were remembering. The stories poured forth like a river, one story leading to another, the past unfolding before their eyes. The connection between the people and the land, the trees and the fog, the bell and the earth, it was all intertwined. The call to leadership passed the days past. Ira realized that she had a responsibility not just to the village, but to the land itself. The fog that had once cloaked the village had returned, not as a burden, but as a sign that the village was still in transition. The bell, once a solitary sound, was now a call to action. It was calling the villagers to remember, but more importantly, it was calling them to act. Ira could feel the weight of the bell, not just in her hands, but in her heart. It was calling her to step forward, to lead the village into the next chapter of its story. She had been the one to help them remember, but now the village needed someone to help them create their future. And that person, Ira realized, was her. But leadership was not about control. It was about listening to the land, to the people, to the stories. It was about knowing when to act and when to stand still, when to lead and when to follow. And most importantly, it was about ensuring that the bell's song would never be forgotten again. The future awaits the next morning. Ira stood by the bell tree, the bell ringing softly in the background. The villagers were gathered around, their faces filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. They were ready, she could feel it. ready to take the next step, ready to create, but there was still much work to be done. The land needed to be tended to, the stories needed to be passed down, and the memory of the village needed to be woven into every action, every choice, every word. Ira turned to the villagers, her heart full of purpose. "We've remembered," she said, her voice steady. "Now it's time to create. Time to build a future that honors our past, a future that is rooted in the land, in each other, and in the stories we will tell." The bell rang once more, not loudly, but with a steady, rhythmic pulse. It wasn't just the past speaking, it was the future calling them forward. Ira smiled, knowing that the village's journey was just beginning. Chapter 11. The Garden Reborn, the Pulse of the Land. As the days turned into weeks, the village continued to thrive in ways that Ira had never imagined. The people, once unsure of their place in the world, now moved with purpose and grace. The land had been awakened, but more importantly, it had remembered. It remembered the stories, the songs, and the connection it once had with the people who lived on it. Ira stood at the edge of the village, looking out at the fields. The fog, which had once been a shadow over the land, was now just a memory, a reminder of what the village had overcome. The bell at her side rang softly, a quiet hum that filled the air, marking the passage of time, marking the beginning of something new. The garden that surrounded the village had blossomed, its flowers vibrant with color and life. The trees, once bare and cold, were now full of leaves, their branches stretching toward the sky in a silent salute to the people who had brought them back to life. But Ira knew that this was not the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. The land had given the village a gift, but the village had to continue to honor it. A vision of the future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ira walked through the fields, the soft rustle of the leaves beneath her feet the only sound in the air. As she walked, a vision appeared before her. It was not a dream, but a feeling, a vision of the future. She saw the village, not as it was now, but as it could be. The fields were even more fertile, the trees even taller, the people even more connected. The village had become a part of the land, and the land had become a part of the village. But the vision was not just about prosperity. It was about balance, the balance between the people and the land, between the present and the past, between the known and the unknown. The vision was a reminder. The village had been reborn, but it could not stay stagnant. It had to continue, to grow, to evolve, to adapt. The Garden of Tomorrow, Ira, stood at the center of the village, looking around at the faces of the people she had come to know so well. They were not just her neighbors. They were her family, connected through their shared history, their shared memories, and their shared commitment to the future. She felt the weight of leadership settle on her shoulders. It was not a burden, it was a responsibility, and she was ready for it. The village needed to continue to evolve. It needed to plant the seeds of the future. And Ira knew that this was her role, to guide them, not with force, but with wisdom, to ensure that the garden, the land, and the stories were passed down to future generations. She turned to the villagers, who had gathered around her, waiting for her to speak. "We've come far," Ira said, her voice steady. "We've remembered who we are and where we came from. But now we must look forward. We must plant the seeds of tomorrow, so that our children and their children will know the same connection to the land that we do." The villagers nodded, understanding the weight of her words. They were ready to begin again. The circle of growth, the days that followed, were filled with action. The village began to plant new crops, restore old buildings, and establish new traditions. The bell rang every evening, not just to mark the passage of time, but as a call to action, a reminder to work together for the future. Ira worked alongside the villagers, guiding them, listening to their stories, and helping them find new ways to connect with the land. They planted new gardens, tended to the trees, and began to build new homes, not just for themselves, but for the future. The village was growing, not just in size, but in spirit. The people had become one with the land, and the land had become one with them. A new beginning one evening, as Ira stood by the bell tree, watching the sun set behind the hills, she felt a sense of peace. The village was no longer just a place on the map. It was a living, breathing entity, full of stories and memories, full of life and growth. The bell rang softly, its sound filling the air with warmth and clarity. The village had come full circle, from forgetting to remembering, from silence to sound, from isolation to connection. Ira looked up at the bell tree, its branches reaching toward the sky, and for the first time she saw it not just as a tree, but as a symbol of the village's resilience, its connection to the earth, and its commitment to the future. She smiled, knowing that the journey was far from over. There would always be more to learn, more to discover, more to create, and as the sun set, casting its golden light over the village, Ira knew that the bell would ring again, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a call to remember the future that was now in their hands. Chapter 12. The Winds of Change. New season. The air in the village had changed. No longer was it the soft, warm embrace of the fog. Instead, there was a crispness to the wind, a freshness that carried the promise of new growth. Yet, with it came an undercurrent of uncertainty, a reminder that the path forward was not always smooth. Ira stood by the bell tree once more, watching the villagers go about their tasks. There was work to be done. The fields had grown lush and green, the trees tall and strong, but the sense of unity they once shared had begun to wane. The call of the bell, once a beacon of hope and connection, now rang with a subtle reminder that change was inevitable. The village was thriving, but Ira felt a growing distance between the people and the land. The memory of the past was still strong, but it wasn't enough to hold them together. The strain of growth as the seasons shifted, so too did the village. The crops were abundant, and the homes were sturdy, but the stories, once shared around the fire, were now being whispered in the corners. The connections between the villagers were not as strong as they had once been. It was as if the bell's song was no longer being heard as clearly, its resonance lost in the growing demands of everyday life. Ira watched as the villagers worked, their faces hard with concentration, their eyes focused on the tasks at hand. They were building a future, but in doing so, they had begun to forget the present. The bell no longer rang with the same clarity, and the sound of the wind through the trees seemed distant. The divide one evening, as the sun set behind the hills. Ira gathered the villagers to discuss the growing tension. There was no anger, no open conflict, but there was a divide. Some of the villagers wanted to focus on progress, on building a prosperous future, on expanding the village and bringing in new ways of life. Others felt the need to slow down, to return to the old ways, to the deep connection they had once shared with the land. "I don't understand," one of the elders said, his voice trembling. "We have everything we need now. Why must we change? Why can't we just be still?" Another villager, younger, with eyes full of ambition, spoke up. "The world is changing. We can't stay in the past forever. We have to keep moving forward. Ira watched as the conversation unfolded, the weight of their words sinking deep into her heart. She had seen it in the garden, in the village, in the land itself, the tension between the old ways and the new. The past and the future were no longer in harmony. The bell had called them together, but now it seemed to echo with a question. How do they move forward without losing themselves? The winds had changed as Ira sat beneath the bell tree that night. The winds picked up, carrying with them a chill that she had not felt in some time. The trees swayed in the breeze, their leaves rustling like whispers of forgotten stories. She closed her eyes and listened. The sound of the wind through the trees was familiar, but now it seemed different, more urgent, more restless. The bell rang once more, its sound deep and resonant. But there was something in it, now something that felt like a call to action. Ira stood up and walked toward the village center, her feet light on the ground. She knew what had to be done. The bell was calling them to balance, to remember the past, but to step into the future with clarity and purpose. She gathered the villagers together again, her voice steady but filled with the weight of her decision. We can't ignore the future, she said, but we must not forget the past. We need to find a way to balance the two. The land, the stories, the bell, these are our roots. But we must also grow. We must stretch our branches toward the sky. The villagers looked at her, unsure, but Ira could feel their uncertainty melting away. The bell rang again, a soft hum, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were listening. A path forward. The days that followed were filled with conversation, with careful thought, with listening. The villagers began to realize that the future was not something they had to fear. It was something they could shape, but only if they remembered where they came from. They began to reconnect with the land, with each other, with the bell. They learned to live in harmony with the changing winds, to embrace the future without losing sight of their roots. Ira knew that the journey was far from over. The village had made great strides, but there would always be challenges, always be moments of doubt. The bell would continue to ring, and with each chime, it would remind them of the balance they must maintain. The circle of life as the sun set. On the village, Ira stood beneath the bell tree, the bell ringing softly in the distance. The winds had calmed, and the village was peaceful once more. The balance had been restored, not by force, but by understanding. Ira smiled to herself, knowing that the village would continue to grow, continue to change, but it would never forget the lessons of the past. The bell would continue to ring, not just to remind them of what had been, but to call them to action, to create a future that honored both the past and the present. And as the bell's song filled the air, Ira knew that the village would always be connected to the land, to the stories, and to each other. Chapter 13. The Garden of Choices. The winds of doubters. The seasons continued to shift. The village found itself at a crossroads. While the people had embraced the changes that Ira had led them through, a quiet unease lingered in the air. The bell still rang every evening, its resonance a reminder of the village's rebirth. But now, there was a tension. The balance between the old ways and the new was beginning to feel more like a struggle. Ira could feel it as she walked through the village. The fields were abundant, the trees strong, but the people, their faces, seemed clouded with questions, with uncertainty. The harmony they had once felt had begun to fray at the edges, as if they were being pulled in different directions. Some sought to push forward, to modernize, to expand. Others held fast to the belief that they must preserve the way things had always been, to return to the simplicity of the past. Iris stood by the bell tree, listening to the soft hum of the bell. She understood their doubt. Change was difficult. The fog had lifted, but new challenges were rising in its place. A choice at the crossroads one evening. As Ira sat by the fire with the elders, the topic of the village's future came to the forefront. The conversation was no longer filled with optimism and unity. It was full of questions. The elders spoke of the old ways, of the time when the village lived simply with the land, without the need for progress or technology. The younger villagers, eager for change, spoke of the outside world, of the opportunities and advancements that could come if they embraced the future. "We cannot stay the way we are forever," said one of the younger villagers, her eyes bright. "With ambition, the world is changing. We must change with it. But at what cost?" replied an elder, her voice steady with the weight of experience. "We have lived for generations in harmony with the land. We must not lose that in the pursuit of progress." Ira listened to both sides, feeling the weight of their words. She knew that both were right. Change was inevitable, but so was the need to stay connected to the past, to the roots that had held them together. The question was not whether to change, but how. She stood, her heart heavy with the responsibility. "We don't have to choose between the past and the future," Ira said softly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "We can honor both, but we must choose how we balance them." The villagers fell silent, waiting for her to continue. "I've seen the vision," she said, her eyes reflecting the light of the fire. "I've seen the future. The path we walk doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both, but it will take all of us to make that choice. We must decide what we want to be, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come." The garden of decisions the following days were filled with deep conversations and difficult choices. The village was at a turning point, and the future was uncertain. Some began to plant new crops, testing the waters of innovation. Others worked on restoring the old traditions, weaving new stories into the fabric of the village's history. Ira walked through the fields, watching the villagers work, each lost in their own thoughts. The balance was delicate, but she could feel something shifting. The bell rang softly in the distance, reminding her that the land was still with them, still listening. That evening, as Ira stood at the edge of the village, looking out over the fields, she realized that the garden was not just the land. It was the village itself, the garden of choices, a place where the people's decisions would shape the future. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the earth, and with it came a new clarity. Ira understood now. The village was not just a place on the map. It was a living, breathing entity, constantly growing, constantly evolving. And like any garden, it needed care, needed balance. But the most important thing Ira realized was that the garden, like the village, was alive, and it was up to them to nurture it, to tend to it, and to protect it. The call of the future bell rang again, this time louder, its sound carrying across the village, through the trees, and into the hills beyond. The villagers gathered around the bell tree, their faces reflecting the weight of their decision. "This is our moment," Ira said, her voice steady with resolve. "We have the choice now to shape the future. We can create a village that honors the past but is open to the future. We can create a garden that grows with the land, with the stories, and with the memories." The villagers nodded, their faces filled with a quiet understanding. They had made their choice. It was time to grow, a future unwritten as the village continued. To rebuild, Ira knew that their journey was far from over. The path ahead would not always be clear, and the balance between the past and the future would always be fragile. But now they had a sense of direction, sense of purpose. The bell rang one last time that evening, its sound filled with promise and hope, and as the sun set over the village, Ira knew that the garden was alive. The bell would continue to ring, not just as a reminder of what had been, but as a call to what could be. Chapter 14. The winds of change, the calm before the storm. The days in the village were long and full of purpose, yet Ira felt a growing sense of restlessness. The balance between honoring the past and embracing the future had been delicate, but as the seasons changed, so too did the mood of the village. The bell still rang each evening, but now the sound seemed to echo more faintly in the air, as if the village itself were unsure of its direction. The people had worked hard to rebuild, planting new crops, establishing new traditions, and passing down stories. But as the village grew, so did the discontent. There were whispers, quiet at first, of wanting more, of seeking greater change, of reaching beyond the borders of the land that had always been home. Ira stood at the edge of the village one evening, looking out at the rolling hills beyond the valley. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else, something unfamiliar. She could feel it in her bones, that sense of uncertainty. The land was calling, but it wasn't the same call she had heard before. It was louder. Now, more insistent, a new direction. The villagers had gathered in the center that evening, drawn together by the sound of the bell, but Ira could see the tension in their eyes. They had come far, but now they were questioning if this was enough. Could they truly keep the balance, or was something more required? An elder spoke first, his voice raspy but clear. "We have built, we have remembered, but now we must ask ourselves, what is our true purpose? Are we meant to remain here, in this village, living as we always have? Or do we have a destiny beyond the fields, beyond the trees?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Ira could see the division already forming. Some of the villagers nodded, their eyes filled with the yearning for something more opportunity, more expansion, more freedom. Others held back, unsure, unwilling to leave the safety and certainty of the village. Ira knew that the village had already changed. It had been reshaped, not just by the land, but by the choices they had made together. But now they were faced with a new challenge, the challenge of identity. The winds of change that night. Ira stood by the bell tree, the wind whipping around her, tugging at her hair and her coat. The bell rang softly in the distance, its sound carrying on the wind like a whisper. It was a call, but a different kind than before. This call was no longer just a reminder of what had been, it was a summons to the future. Ira's heart pounded in her chest as the wind howled louder, as if the land itself were speaking to her. She closed her eyes and listened. The wind carried the stories of the past, the voices of the ancestors, but it also carried the voices of the future. The land had always been a part of them, but now the village had outgrown it. They needed to find new paths, new horizons. The road ahead. The next day, Ira called the villagers together again. The air was thick with uncertainty, but Ira felt a calmness settle within her. She understood now. They could not keep living in the shadow of the past. They had to take the lessons of the past, the wisdom of the land, and step into the future together. She stood before them, the bell at her side, its gentle hum filling the silence. "We've done something extraordinary," she said, her voice steady. "We've rebuilt, we've remembered, and we've come together in ways we never thought possible. But now, it's time to look ahead. It's time to step beyond the boundaries we've set for ourselves." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We cannot stay here forever. The world is changing, and so must we. The land will always be our home, but we must venture beyond it to find our true place in the world. We will carry the stories of this village, the memories of our ancestors, but we must also write our own stories, together." The villagers listened in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on them. They had already made so much progress, but the idea of stepping into the unknown was daunting. But Ira could see it in their eyes. They were ready. They were ready to grow, to stretch beyond the fields they had known their entire lives. A new beginning. The following days were filled with plans and preparations. The village, though small, was no longer confined to the boundaries it had once known. They began to build roads, to cultivate new crops that could thrive beyond the valley. They began to expand, not just in size, but in vision. The bell rang every evening, but it was no longer a call to remember. It was a call to act, to move forward, to create, to become. Ira walked through the village, her heart light with purpose. The land would always be their foundation, but the village was no longer bound to it. The future was theirs to shape. The choice of the land one morning. As Ira stood on the hilltop overlooking the village, she saw it the horizon. The land stretched out before her, vast and full of possibilities. The fog was gone, the sky clear, and the world lay open, waiting. But she knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The winds of change were always unpredictable, always shifting. But Ira was ready. She was ready to lead, to guide the village into this new chapter, to help them forge a future that was both rooted in the past and open to the future. The bell would continue to ring, not just as a reminder, but as a call to action, a call to write the next chapter in the story of the village. And as the wind blew through the trees, Ira knew that they were not just moving forward, they were growing. Chapter 15. The boundaries beyond the horizon, a new dawn. The village had changed once again, and Ira could feel it in her bones. The winds had shifted, bringing with them the scent of distant lands and new opportunities. The once familiar hills were now only the beginning of their journey. The village had long ago outgrown its borders, and now it was time to stretch even further. As the first rays of the sun touched the earth, Ira stood at the top of the hill, overlooking the village below. The bell rang softly, its sound not as a reminder of what had been, but as a call to what could be. The horizon stretched before her, endless and full of promise. She knew that the land would always be home, but it was no longer enough. The village had become part of something larger, part of a world that was constantly evolving. Ira felt the weight of the future pressing against her chest. But it was not a burden. It was a calling, and she was ready to answer it. The path to the unknowns, the village prepared for what lay ahead. The villagers were filled with both excitement and fear. There were many who embraced the idea of leaving the familiar, of seeking new lands, of building something even greater. But there were also those who hesitated, who felt the pull of the past, who wondered if the journey beyond the horizon was worth the risk. Ira knew that the path forward would not be easy. There would be hardships, and there would be sacrifices. But there would also be growth, both for the land and for the people. They had already come so far, and now it was time to go even further. She gathered the villagers together, her heart full of resolve. "We've built something here, something strong and lasting," she said, her voice steady, "but we cannot stop. We must continue to grow, to reach for the horizon. The world beyond is vast, and we are ready to step into it." The villagers listened in silence, and Ira could see the mix of fear and determination in their eyes. This was a crossroads, and they would need to walk it together. The great departure, the days leading up to the departure, were filled with preparation. The villagers packed their belongings, gathered the crops they had planted, and said their goodbyes to the land they had known for so long. It was a bittersweet moment. They had built their lives here, and now they were leaving it behind. But Ira knew that this was not the end. It was the beginning of something new. The village had already begun to evolve, and this journey would take them to places they could only dream of. As the villagers stood in the clearing one final time, the bell rang, a final, resounding chime, a song of farewell and promise. Ira stood before the bell tree, her hand resting on the trunk. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her, and in that moment, she knew that the village would always be connected to this place, no matter where they went. The wind began to stir, and with it, the fog that had once settled over the village. But this time, the fog was not an obstacle. It was a reminder that the journey ahead would not be without its challenges. The fog would be there, but they would face it together, with strength and unity. The villagers took their first steps toward the unknown, their hearts filled with anticipation, and the bell's soft hum ringing in their ears. A new beginning. Journey took the villagers beyond the hills and into the wider world. The land they had once known was now behind them, but they carried it with them, its stories, its lessons, and its memories as they traveled. Ira found herself reflecting on the journey they had taken. The village had come so far, from the silence of the past to the vibrant, thriving community they were now. But the journey had just begun. They were stepping into a world that was full of opportunities, but also full of unknowns. The road ahead was uncertain, but Ira felt a sense of peace in knowing that they were no longer bound by the past. They were free to create their own future, to build a new story, one that would be shaped by their decisions, their connections, and their growth. The call of the horizon as the village reached the edge of a vast plain. The land opened up before them, stretching as far as the eye could see. The horizon was no longer a distant line. It was a place they could walk toward. Ira stood at the front of the group, looking out at the wide open world ahead. She could feel the land calling to her, the same way it had done so many times before. But now the call was different. It was a call to explore, to create, to become something more than they had ever imagined. She looked back at the village, her heart full of gratitude. The journey had been long, and the road ahead would be just as challenging. But for the first time, Ira felt truly ready. The bell rang once more. Its sound carried on the wind, filling the air with a deep, resonant hum. It was a sound of promise, of new beginnings, and with that, Ira stepped forward, leading the village into the future. Chapter 16. The Land of Uncertainty. The arrival at new shores after weeks of travel. The village finally arrived at the edge of a new land, vast, untamed expanse that stretched out before them. The land was different from what they had known. The air felt fresh, the sky vast and open, and the earth beneath their feet had a different kind of energy, one that was both inviting and unpredictable. Ira stood at the front of the group, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The journey had been long, and though the villagers were weary, There was a sense of anticipation in the air. They had left behind the safety of their old home, the village that had been their cradle, but now they were stepping into the unknown. The future awaited them, but with it came the question, what kind of future would they build? The bell, still ringing softly in Ira's hand, vibrated gently, a quiet reminder of the past, but it also called them forward into the new world that lay before them, the new landscape. The land before them was wild and untouched. The forests were dense, the rivers wide, and the fields seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. It was a land full of potential, but also full of challenges. The village had come this far, but now they would need to find their place in this new world, to carve out a future that was truly their own. Ira could feel the weight of the decision on her shoulders. This was a pivotal moment, one that would define not just the village, but her own role in their story. She had led them this far, but now they would need to build something lasting, something that honored both the past and the future. But the land, this new land, was unpredictable. There was no guarantee of success, no promise that they would find the peace and prosperity they sought. Yet Ira could feel the call of the land beneath her feet, a pull to dig deep, to connect the first steps into the unknown the villagers set. Up camp at the edge of the forest, their tents scattered beneath the tall trees, their fires lighting the evening air with a warm glow. Ira walked among them, speaking with the elders, the farmers, the builders, and the young ones. They all had different ideas about what to do next, and Ira listened carefully. Some of the villagers were eager to start building immediately. They wanted to plant crops, to stake their claim on the land, to turn it into something they could call their own. Others, however, were more cautious. They wanted to explore, to understand the land first before committing to anything permanent. Ira understood both perspectives. The land had given them everything they needed so far, but now it demanded something else, patience. They had to learn from the land, not just take from it. I think it's time we listen to the land, Ira said one evening as she gathered the villagers around the fire. It has been guiding us all along, and we must trust that it will continue to show us the way. The first test, the following day, Ira and a small group of villagers ventured into the forest. They needed to assess the land, to find out what it offered. They gathered herbs, checked the soil, and examined the trees. The forest was vast and filled with life, wild, untamed, yet alive with potential. But as they moved deeper into the forest, the air grew thick with humidity, and the path grew harder to follow. The trees were dense, their branches intertwining. In a tangled maze, the sounds of the forest were foreign. Strange creatures rustled in the underbrush, and the wind howled through the trees. The further they ventured, the more they realized that this was not a safe land. It would not be easy to make a home here. The land had its own rhythm, its own rules, and it would not be tamed without effort. The unexpected discovery as they continued. Ira and the group stumbled upon something unexpected, hidden in the heart of the forest. They discovered a clearing, an ancient stone structure, half buried in the earth. It was clear that this place had been used long ago, but by who and for what purpose was a mystery. Ira walked round the structure, touching the weathered stones. There were carvings, ancient symbols etched deep into the surface, some of them familiar, some of them foreign. They seemed to speak of balance, of the connection between the earth and the sky, between life and death. "This is no ordinary place," Ira whispered, her fingers tracing the markings. "It's a marker, a signpost." The villagers gathered around, studying the structure. They could feel the weight of the place, its history, its purpose. It was as if the land was trying to tell them something, to guide them toward a deeper understanding of their connection to it. A decision made that night, as Ira sat by the fire, the weight of their discovery settled in. The land had a story to tell, but it was not a story that could be told with words alone. It was a story that had to be lived. Ira knew that they were at a crossroads. They could continue to explore, to learn from the land, to slowly build their future, or they could rush forward, staking their claim on this new world, without truly understanding what it had to offer. But the bell, ever present at her side, seemed to hum softly, urging her to listen. It was time to go forward, but it was also time to remember to listen to the land, to understand it, to respect it. The land will tell us when we're ready, Ira said softly to the villagers gathered around the fire. But we must be patient. We must be open to what it offers. And so they would wait. They would listen. And in time, the land would guide them, as it had always done. Chapter 17. The Heart of the Wilds. The new dawn, the village had settled into the rhythm of their new life. But there was still much to be done. The land was vast and untamed, a place full of potential, but also rife with challenges. The trees towered overhead, the wilds stretched endlessly in every direction, and the air was alive with the sounds of creatures both known and unknown. Ira stood at the edge of the camp, looking out into the wilds. She could feel the pulse of the land beneath her feet, the heartbeat of something ancient and alive. This was a place of growth and decay, of creation and destruction. It was a place that demanded respect, but it also offered the opportunity for something greater, a chance to start anew, to create a future from the earth beneath them. But Ira knew that this was no ordinary land. It was a living entity, one that would not yield easily. The village had already learned this lesson the hard way. The wind howled through the trees, and Ira turned, feeling the breeze on her face. It was time to explore deeper into the land, to understand its rhythms, its needs, and its secrets. The first expedition that morning, Ira and a group of villagers set out into the wilderness. They had no clear destination, only the desire to explore, to discover what the land had to offer. The paths were unfamiliar, the trees dense, and the air thick with humidity. They walked for hours, guided only by the sound of the bell, which Ira had brought with her as a constant reminder of their connection to the past. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the trees began to thin, revealing a vast clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a rock formation, jagged and weathered by time. It was unlike anything Ira had seen before, tall, imposing, and ancient. There was something about it that felt sacred, as if it had been there long before the village had ever existed. Ira approached the rock formation, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and awe. She felt the presence of something larger than herself, something that had been watching, waiting. The ancient markings. The rock was covered in carvings, symbols, patterns, and markings that were unlike any Ira had seen in the village. They were intricate, delicate, and deeply etched into the stone, as if they had been carved over centuries. Some of the symbols were familiar shapes she had seen on the beltree, but others were completely foreign, their meanings hidden in time. One by one, the villagers approached the rock, running their hands over the carvings, feeling the texture of the stone, but none of them could make sense of the markings. Ira stepped forward, her fingers brushing the surface of the rock. As she did, a faint vibration ran through her, a pulse that seemed to echo through the earth itself. She closed her eyes, letting the feeling wash over her. For a moment, everything was still. The wind, the sounds of the forest, the beating of her heart, it all seemed to fade away. All that remained was the connection between her and the land, the pull of the ancient markings beneath her fingers. Then she heard it, a whisper, a soft, distant voice carried on the wind. Remember, the word echoed in her mind, a simple command, but one filled with power. Ira opened her eyes, her breath catching in her chest. She knew what it meant. This was no ordinary rock formation. It was a marker, a guide, a reminder of the ancient bond between the land and those who lived on it. The guardian of the wilds suddenly. A sound broke the silence, the rustling of leaves, the sound of something moving through the forest. The villagers tensed, looking around, but Ira stood still, her senses heightened. From the shadows of the trees emerged a figure tall, covered in a cloak of leaves and vines. Its face was hidden, but there was an aura of power about it, an energy that filled the air. Ira stepped forward, her heart pounding, but she was not afraid. She knew that this was no enemy. This was something else. This was the guardian of the land. The figure raised its hand, and in that moment, the bell Ira carried began to hum, vibrating with a strange energy. The guardian's presence seemed to align with the rhythm of the bell, the sound growing louder, stronger. "You have come," the figure said, its voice deep, like the sound of the earth itself. "You are the ones who remember. You are the ones who carry the land's story forward." Ira felt the weight of the words. They were not just for Herd, they were for the village. This was a turning point. The land was not simply something to be taken from, it was something to be honored. The guardian continued, "The land gives, but it also asks. Will you remember its lessons? Will you honor its balance?" Ira nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. The land was calling to them, but it was not a call to conquer or to expand. It was a call to understand, to live in harmony with the world around them. The choice as the guardian faded into the shadows. The villagers gathered around Ira. Their faces were filled with questions, but Ira knew the answer. The land had spoken, and now it was their responsibility to listen. They would not just take from the land, they would grow with it, live alongside it, and remember the stories of the past as they built a new future. The bell rang again, its hum, steady and strong, as if in approval. The first steps toward balance. Ira turned to the villagers, her voice filled with newfound certainty. "The land has spoken," she said. "We will build here, but we will do so with respect. We will honor the balance between the past and the future. We will listen to the land and remember its lessons." And with that, they took their first steps forward into the unknown, into the wilds, but with the wisdom of the past and the promise of the future guiding them. Epilogue. The echoes of the bell quiet peace. The days in the village had become a peaceful rhythm, where each morning was greeted with the sound of the bell, its hum filling the air with a sense of purpose and unity. The land had become their partner, not just a place to live, but a living, breathing entity that they had learned to respect and honor. The village had flourished, not just in size, but in spirit. They had created something new, something born from both the past and the future, a harmonious blend of growth and tradition. The fog that had once hung heavy over their lives was now a distant memory, replaced by the bright sky and the open horizons ahead. But Ira knew that the journey was not over. They had built a foundation, but the village would continue to grow and evolve. The land would always have lessons to teach, and they would continue to learn from it shaping their future. With every step they took, the future beckons one evening. Ira stood by the bell tree, the wind gently rustling the leaves above her. The village was calm, the light of the setting sun casting long shadows over the land. The villagers had gathered for the evening, their faces filled with quiet contentment, knowing that they were exactly where they were meant to be. The bell rang one last time that night, its sound deep and resonant, filling the air with the presence of the past and the promise of the future. Ira smiled as the villagers looked up at the sky, their hearts full of gratitude and hope. They had come so far, and now they were part of something greater, a legacy that would be carried forward, not just by them, but by those who would come after them. The circle completes the next morning. Ira woke early, as was her habit. The village was still, the only sound the gentle hum of the bell and the quiet rhythm of nature waking up. She walked through the fields, the ground beneath her feet firm and steady, a reflection of the foundation they had built together. She paused for a moment, looking out across the land. The horizon stretched out before her, wide and open, full of endless possibilities. But in that moment, she realized something: the journey was not just about the destination. It was about the path, the steps they had taken together, the choices they had made. The land had taught them that balance was key, that growth could not come without respect, that the past could not be forgotten, but it could not be allowed to bind them either. They had created a village that was alive, vibrant, and connected to the land, to the stories, and to each other. Ira closed her eyes, letting the wind carry the sound of the bell toward her. She felt the weight of the past, the lessons learned, and the promise of the future. And she knew that the bell would continue to ring, not just for her, but for everyone, for generations to come. The legacy of the bellers. The days passed. The village continued to grow and evolve, but always with the same respect for the land that had brought them together. They celebrated their past, built their future, and embraced the lessons of the bell. And though the bell would eventually fall silent, its echoes would continue to shape their lives. The village would remain a place of peace and connection, a place where the past and the future lived in harmony, where the bell would always ring as a reminder of the journey they had taken.